kind of part two of the video series where I'm talking about triggers. But I want to have a little bit of a dialogue about why it seems to be so easy, or why the human consciousness likes to gravitate towards blaming others, okay? So it's very common for human beings to project outwards blame and to see the world in all of the myriad of ways that it has wronged us, the individual. The problem with the blame game is that it really does you no good, okay? So I'm not talking about if somebody is specifically physically hurting you or being a bully. Okay, there are instances certainly in the world, which I will make other videos about, where people are acting completely inappropriately in a very distorted fashion. They have their own pain and they're coming from, again, a place of pain, okay? So that's another story. But what I'm talking about is when a totally healthy adult, or younger person displaces the blame for circumstances or certain things and does not or will not look at their own role in an event, a situation, an obstacle, a trauma, whatever it may be. And again, this is a difficult thing to maneuver around if you are with or are around individuals who, again, do not want to see their part in the equation. Because it doesn't matter what situation you're in life, it takes two to tango, okay? And if there is conflict and conflict is arising, to some degree, no matter what your role is, you're playing a part. And so you have to look at different types and tendencies. So are you passive aggressive? What is passive aggression? It means that, okay, you're taking sort of a backseat role, you're not saying much, you might be walking on eggshells, in whatever situation it might be, but then to essentially fight back, you start becoming manipulative and secretive and talking in other directions, and you start creating vortexes of negativity in other passive ways, okay? But it still adds to the conflict and it still creates chaos, okay? So it's important to start to look at some of your own involvement in any situation and start to figure out how, or from what angle you are part of the equation. Okay, the other thing you can do is be very, very aggressive. So again, sometimes this is something that I suffer with. I also suffer from being passive aggressive, or else I wouldn't know it. I wouldn't know how to talk about it if it hadn't been something that I had or have done in the past. And 100%, when I was a younger individual, I tended to be more passive aggressive because, again, I didn't have a voice, so I didn't know how to articulate my feelings. So I did it in a very convoluted, roundabout way, and it still didn't turn out well. I mean, passive aggression is very confusing. It makes a lot of weird offshoots of energy behind the scenes, and I have come to know through my years of wisdom that it's not an attribute that I want to be allowing to come out of my vehicle, out of my body, okay? Now, aggression. So this is when we're in a situation, now whether it is physical, whether it is verbal, whether it's conflict-based, where we become the dominant person and we become aggressive to the aggressor, okay? And again, this is something that over time I have learned to become in certain instances. But what I've learned specifically, about playing this very alpha role is that it really actually doesn't do a lot of good, okay? So if somebody is coming at you with a very aggressive energy and you match that aggressive energy, then you have two very aggressive individuals. And usually what happens in this kind of energy exchange is that it just becomes louder, more furious, and more intense until eventually one energy exhausts the other. And then the energy which is capable or which has enough strength to exhaust the other, comes out and feels they are the victor. Okay, but they're not the victor, because really the two energies have just truly not heard anything, torn each other down, and really exhausted each other's energy. There's not, when we have, like, even if we look at a really big example of war, and you have two countries or groups of countries fighting against each other, okay, and at some point in this war you announce a victor because the other side decided to raise the white flag and they surrendered. On both sides, there's extreme collateral damage, there's extreme destruction, and truly there's no winner. There's just a lot of destruction. And eventually one side exhausted the other. So if we can bring that very macro example down to the micro, down to our own individual lives, and we look at that and we say, okay, so having a very aggressive approach and fighting with others doesn't really ever seem to have a good outcome. So then what is another option? Another option is, like what I said in my previous video about the shadow self, is when we humble our energy. And when we humble our energy and we say, okay, there are things that I did not do correctly. I'm going to look at those things, we're going to discuss those things. But the caveat to this is the other individual has to be ready to humble themselves as well. They have to, or a set of individuals. It doesn't have to be mono, okay? But there needs to be an understanding that both sides of the equation are going to settle their energy into a balanced state, humble themselves, and take responsibility for whatever distortion is their side of the chaos. And then from there, rather than saying, you did this, you did this, playing the blame game, you don't do that, because again, it's not, in this type of a communication, it's not your responsibility to blame the other person. It's your responsibility to take responsibility for yourself. And so your only role is to again, humble yourself and say, okay, these are the aspects of my own behavioral output that I can work on and change. Then you walk away and start implementing a plan, which is a personal plan. Only you can hold yourself accountable. It's not up to you to hold the other party accountable, okay? Because they have their own work. But then you refocus the energy on yourself and you start to do the work that you need to do instead of playing the blame game. And this is what so often our triggers are about. Our triggers trigger us because we're seeing a reflection of something that we don't like. And generally, that thing we don't like to some degree has an aspect of ourself. There's a facet of it that also is distorted within ourselves. Not all the time. I'm not going to say that in every instance this is the case, but many, many times we can look at that outward expression and say, okay, I'm not liking this outward expression. However, is there anything I can identify within the self that might be similar in terms of frequency. And when I'm talking frequency, I mean the expression, what you're seeing on your external landscape, in your environment. You can look at it and say, what about that do I not enjoy? Okay, why don't I enjoy that expression? Then we mirror it back to the self. We say, okay, is there anything that I am capable of doing, have done, or tendencies that may exist within me that might look like that? And then we do the work, and then we start the work. We quit projecting, we quit trying to fix the external world, because again, we can't fix the external world. I cannot impose my will upon the other, upon you, upon anyone, and blame them enough, hate them enough, criticize them enough to change them. Not possible. Okay, there's nothing that I can fundamentally do to change your life. The only thing I can fundamentally do to change anything is to change myself. And through that work of working with my own consciousness, I become a better person. And when I become a better person, I reflect better things onto the external world, and therefore, hopefully, better things are mirrored back to me. Not always. Planet Earth is fairly chaotic, so I don't want to say that, here's another example. Look at children. Children are beautiful, innocent aspects of perfection, divine perfection. They come into this world and they're just innocent. And I mean children of all types. I'm talking, animal children, human children. Look at, puppies or little, baby elephants. It doesn't matter what it is. Any creature that is in its infancy is so perfect in its creation, okay? And we learn these negative traits through the living process. But if we can start to, again, resurrect our thinking, if we can look at it in this vibrational patterning. So the descent is the descent into distorted thinking, into attack thinking, violent thinking. Okay, if we can understand it in this spectrum, then the ascent or the resurrection would be the systematic, diligent practice through the desire for good character and righteousness to work our way up to the best version that we can be at any given moment. We don't know the future. We don't know what is to come, but we know what we can do each and every day in the now to create the best expression of that day. Okay, so again, I'm going to wrap this video up, but I really, really want to impart to you that when you are externalizing the blame, when you are looking at the exterior world and counting up all of the things that life is not doing for you and people are not doing for you and how all these individuals are completely horrible, at the very, very least, if you were really in total belief of that, you could completely extract yourself from society, go and live in a cabin in the woods, and you would be happy? I'm not sure. Maybe if you were completely happy with yourself, you would be, okay? But again, we have interactions. We have the ability to have the blessing of family and friends and the world at large, which is a kaleidoscope of interesting experiences. And if, again, we work diligently on being the best version of ourselves, then the world becomes a beautiful adventure. But this is something that each and every human being has to take responsibility for and has to work towards. So, a couple of these videos were a little bit more heavy, but I think they are important. And again, this is why I'm taking the time to teach some of this. Hopefully it helps you. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But again, have a wonderful week and enjoy it.